Imagine a world where mental illness like depression or PTSD is treated with a club drug. What? This is reality. Over 18 million people in 2020 alone said they've consumed MDMA in their life. Do you want to know what lies behind those numbers? A lot of interesting shit. Welcome to a new episode of Entheogenic Renaissance. This episode is dedicated to a substance called MDMA, or widely known as ecstasy or Molly or E, and many other variations. In this episode, of course, I will talk about the therapeutic potential of entheogens, and it will be dedicated to one particular substance. During the episode, you will learn about how it was synthesized, how it's being used, and whether or not it will be used to treat mental illnesses such as depression or PTSD in adolescents in the near future. What? Drugs are being given to children? What the hell? What is the world are we living in today? Alright, let's roll. First thing you need to understand about MDMA is that it's been synthesized in the end of 19th century by another pharmaceutical company called Merck. So they've synthesized it, and according to some rumors, it was used during World War I and II, but of course you probably need to go into details and understand whether or not it did in fact happen. But it was not used for treatment widely until 1960s, when the psychedelic renaissance, first version at least of it, happened, and Western world, US in particular, came to know entheogens, or back in the day they were called psychedelics. So anyway, during that time, one of the pioneers in therapeutic application of psychedelics for treating various mental illnesses, Leo Zeff, a psychiatrist from University UC Berkeley, where, by the way, I got through a program called Psychedelics and the Mind. So Leo Zeff was one of the first people who discovered the therapeutic potential and how it can help treat people's mental illnesses. There were others who experimented with the substance, but unfortunately, as of the beginning of 70s, with the Nixon's racist war on drugs pact, it got prohibited. But luckily, some people continued the research, and one of such people is Alexander Shulgin, a child of Russian immigrants. Those leaking brains, right? So who was it? Valentina Gerken, or Vassan, spouse of Gordon Vassan, Russian immigrant, and Alexander Shulgin. Maybe we can find some evidence here saying that Russians have contributed to the development of psychedelic world. I am not talking on the behalf of Russian people, but I want to recognize that not all Russians are bad, after all. So anyway, Alexander Shulgin resynthesized MDMA and reintroduced it back to therapy, and his colleagues in University of California, Berkeley, and other locations within California, where it all flourished. By the way, Alexander, or Sasha Shulgin, is known for synthesizing roughly 200,000 or 300,000 of different substances, so-called designer drugs, which he described in his book called Peak Owl, phenethylamines that I've known to like, if I remember correctly. By the way, what is MDMA in terms of the molecule? It is 3,4-methylendioxymethamphetamine. I hope I pronounced it correctly. If not, put it in the comments, please. So originally it was not used in treating mental illnesses, of course. It is close relative MDA, probably stands for methylendioxyamphetamine. I don't know. MDA is slightly different if you compare with MDMA. It's longer lasting. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to experience MDA, although I did experience MDMA roughly 21 Shit, when was it? Yeah, roughly 20 years ago. I was an adult. Yeah, hopefully. I don't remember. Maybe I wasn't. It was one of my first years in the university, and yeah, I was at the club. This is where I consumed it for the first time. But ever since, I haven't had a chance to use it in the therapeutic context because I've never considered it, and this is another topic that I'll try to touch during this episode, is recreational consumption or club consumption. But let's take a step back. I've told you what it stands for in terms of the molecule, how it works. How it works is that it affects already known serotonin 2A receptor or 5-HT2A, which is flourished with serotonin. So hopefully I'm not wrong here, but put it in the comments if I say something wrong. But basically the amount of serotonin produced in the brain quadruples, and the neurons are not being used to consume it, which means that there's like two big shit, I'm not even gonna go there. So main receptor that MDMA connects with is serotonin 2A receptor or 5-HT2A. So what does MDMA do in your brain? It activates serotonin or 5-HT2A receptor, and it produces amounts of norepinephrine, which is basically adrenaline, but the different type, one that is not produced in your kidneys. And it also affects dopaminergic receptors, but not that much. So MDMA is typically known as love drug, or as I at least call it, or called it at some point in time, pure essence of love. And by the way, I'm not advocating for the use of illegal substances here. Don't forget, laws are there to protect you, not only you, the government mainly, but you of course. So don't do any stupid shit, don't buy drugs online, don't consume them, don't offer them to anybody. I'm here just informing people about what it is being used, about how it is being used in therapeutic context, okay? And of course sharing my own experience with it, back in the day at least, or for some substances still today. But don't worry, I know a lot about them because I've not only consumed them, I've studied them. I've listened to hundreds of hours of podcasts and different types of videos recorded, dedicated to application of entheogens, not only the therapeutic potential, but in general, and how it works in human brain. Unfortunately, I'm not all the time able to reproduce the knowledge that I'm gathering also from sources like Huberman Lab podcast that I've been listening to from the very beginning. Actually, just started to listen relatively recently, half a year ago, but I started to listen for each and every one episode sequentially from the first one that was issued. And ever since, I've been reading dozens or hundreds of publications and clinical trials, so there's a lot of data that I've acquired. Anyway, talking about how it works in your brain. So MDMA is slightly different from the tryptamine type of psychedelics. Those are LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, and DMT, if I'm not mistaken here. If I am, please put it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, of course. But other than that, it also works as an empathogen. What the fuck is an empathogen? So you've probably heard of the word empathy, and this is an emotional concept, meaning that one person or individual is able to feel or at least understand the emotions of another person, because probably feeling is not possible at all, because simply each and every single individual are unique, and the way the neural circuits are working in terms of reproducing specific emotions are different. And of course you can say a word that would mean a certain feeling, but that does not necessarily mean that this meaning is universal and the comprehension of this meaning is. So going back to the pathogen, it creates the sense of empathy, and that's why I called it the pure essence of love. So you feel as if you love the entire world and the entire world loves you backwards. There's an interesting experiment that's been done with a species that is widely known as octopus. I don't remember how it's in Latin. Put it in the comments. So octopuses, quite delicious though, known as an antisocial creatures, meaning that if they are in a company within one place with another octopus, they're not even going to connect in any way unless they want to try and kill each other. So that's how antisocial they are. So the experiment conducted with them was to basically give them MDMA and see how it is going to work in terms of the antisocial behavior. What happened is that when they were placed from two divided chambers into single one, they hugged. They engaged with each other and they spent time with each other. Also, after the MDMA finished and went out of the system, which means the effects were still long-lasting even after they were gone from the body. Right. And there's another concept to it called entheogenic, meaning being able to touch within. So this is not a classic entheogen, right? It's not about the deity within, it is more about reconnecting with oneself. That's why there is huge potential for the use in therapy. But let's talk first about how it started to be a drug of abuse. So as you can imagine, out of those 18 million people that I started with, probably each and every person experiences on pure MDMA, and I need to highlight this here because you don't know about the quality of the substance, unfortunately, due to the laws and limitations and the legislation around it. But let's get back to it later on. You can understand that it has been consumed in the club scene because with the emergence of electronic music and with the appearance of raves as such, the consumption of MDMA plummeted. And judging from my own experience, again, I consumed it for the first time within a club, even though it was roughly in 2007 or so. But anyway, whenever you are on this substance, you feel the insane amount of energy, and the reason is that there norepinephrine or adrenaline is in your body. That's why people want to move, and they are pretty much energized or jittery, and they cannot stand in a single place. There's no need for them. But of course, set and setting play a crucial role in terms of how it would all be felt like by a single individual. So of course, with the growth of the raves and clubs emerging and the electronic music being developed rapidly, and I know a lot about electronic music because I've listened to a lot of electronic music in my life. Various genres, but not only electronic, of course, two other genres as well. At some point in time I was even listening to Spice Girls. Well, why not? Music is different. But anyway, going back to the clubs and raves, and people were consuming it in huge amounts in 80s. It got quite fast. So the restrictions in terms of the prohibition and the control of the substance started to become more and more firm, probably would be the word to use here. And quite fast, eventually it got out from streets and was not available to many people. But people who used this not in a recreational manner, but in a therapeutic approach, they realized that MDMA has an insane potential for treating various mental illnesses. And one of those people from the psychedelic era of 20th century called Rick Doblin in 1986, actually was the year when I was born and when Chernobyl happened, or didn't happen in the Soviet Union actually. at least according to the official media sources from that time. But anyway, Rick Doblin founded the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies with the sole purpose of reintroducing MDMA in therapeutic scene, in therapeutic context. And ever since, MAPS was extremely successful at it, and I will briefly mention it a bit later on. So there's a lot of research and there's a lot of protocols, and the reason they are available is that Rick Doblin is a legal professional. He studied law at Harvard, if I remember correctly, and then using the knowledge of laws, he came back and built protocols that would help him and the organization to test MDMA in a therapeutic context. So how does it work? Typically, as any psychedelic-assisted therapy, it requires therapist, patient, and the substance. And of course, setting and tons of preparation. So with MDMA, it is done within 3 or even more phases. First one being preparation, during which a patient is not being screened for various types of existing disorders, but being informed about the procedure itself, the effects of the substance, and what would be happening with them after. Second part would be the consumption itself, that would last for several hours, and depending on the substance, it lasts roughly 5 to 6 hours, and 3 hours of intense experience, let's put it this way. Of course, the amount of substance varies depending on the clinical trial you're looking at, but the dosages are from 70 to 120 milligram, M-I-L-I, grams, milligrams, small grams, okay? Tiny grams, milligrams. And, apologies, from 80 to 120 milligrams. But of course, in the club scene, it is widely used in the shape of pills, whereas in the clinical trials, probably it is slightly different, it's either intravenously or maybe even pill as well. I don't know, I haven't been in a clinical trial, won't read it. And of course, the data with double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trials tells us that MDMA is extremely effective. So much so that on 13th of September 2023, MAPS were successful at passing through a third phase of clinical trials controlled by FDA in the United States for treating PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with the MDMA. Okay, so this is a very substantial proof that it does have the therapeutic potential for treating mental illnesses. But of course, there are other types of mental illnesses that are being addressed, such as depression, and not only that. The beauty of it is that once it would be introduced into the system, into the medical system, because it showed its effectiveness, it can be prescribed by the doctors. By the way, in Australia, you can already get a prescription for MDMA-assisted therapy. In the United States, not yet, but it may become part of an insurance package. Moreover, with the years to pass, and probably the introduction into insurance is gonna happen within 2024, 2025, the latest, but after that, it will then be used to test adolescents and treat trauma with adolescents. There's an interesting thing here. The consumption of entheogens by adolescents is not widely researched, and of course there is data that show, and there's a saying that you shouldn't consume entheogens until you're 25. Because what entheogens do, they demolish ego and they dissolute ego. So prior to dissoluting your ego, create one first, okay? But that didn't work for me. I diluted my ego before creating a good one. That's why I'm suffering the consequences of doing this. So, of course, there are risks, and the setting is critical for the consumption of entheogens, and they do influence the experience, and they do influence people who are experiencing this substance on the moment. But how does it work in terms of the therapy? Just to try and quickly describe the methodology here. So I told you about the 3 phases, but then again, when we're talking about a certain person who is going through the therapy, when they end with an attempt to treat PTSD or depression or something like that. So PTSD will arise, and it's not only something very radical like somebody dying next to you because of the bombshell. It could be something different, less traumatic, but still quite traumatic, such as childhood bullying or maybe an abuse, verbal abuse by parents or significant others, something like that. So when the person experiences MDMA, such person changes the whole narrative and the perception of oneself. So remember, as all entheogens, it helps build connection with deeper levels of subconscious. This is where one can revisit very traumatic experiences that happened with them during their life and be there for oneself, but with huge amounts of empathy, love, forgiving, and everything that is related to it. So basically, such person is able to rewire own brain and help cope with problematic experience. So in terms of the psychological aspect, how do you treat different type of mental illness or problem or some, let's say, psychological barrier? You change perception and you change your own understanding and perception and the meaning around that particular situation or words or phrase or something or actions by somebody. And by revisiting a hurtful or problematic experience, you are then able to rewire your own brain. This is neuroscience, this is widely known information that you can Google search by your own, but those who know, they know. Anyway, so you can rewire your perception and you can rewire your brain. And with the assistance of a therapist, one can revisit an extremely traumatic experience that is causing a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, and blocking the entire life's potential from unlocking it. Of course, you need to understand that MDMA is not that safe after all. In spite of entheogens being quite safe, there aren't many cases of lethal dose of MDMA, although there are, so better not to overconsume, I guess. But the risks related with MDMA are mainly around the laws around it, and namely the laws that are prohibiting. If you cannot buy a good quality substance, you can probably go to darknet or somewhere else, or where people typically acquire drugs. I don't know. You ask those people. But you cannot be sure in quality of the substance because you don't know who did it, you don't know what were the ingredients we used for its production, you don't know what is also in it. So the problem with MDMA or Molly is that typically it is being sold in the shape of pills, not powder, and in that shape of pills it could be a combination of MDMA and something else. So this is the problem. If you don't know the substance, you can actually hurt yourself even more, because in some cases MDMA is being mixed with fentanyl, and this is the type of opioid that you don't want to mess with. In some cases it is speed or something else. This is the problem with MDMA. Whenever it's being bought in underground context, is that you never fucking know what is in that pill. So this is the danger that you go by default. Unlike mushrooms, for instance, or LSD, although you don't really know whether or not it's LSD. I think probably the safest psychedelic would be mushrooms, because you know what they are and they know how they affect. Other than that, there are harsher risks depending on the substance. You probably have heard about the myth, and I've talked about the myths in one of my previous episodes, that MDMA burns your brain. This is total bullshit. It doesn't do anything even close to it. It reconnects your neural circuits and help you Be a better human being. One of the effects of MDMA for me at some point in time was that I called my mother to congratulate her on her birthday and tell her thank you for giving birth to me. I was high as kite on MDMA, so this is how it works pretty much. And of course I loved my mother, the universe and everything. So the other risks associated with MDMA use is that next day you may feel shitty because of all the roller coaster experience, and I typically call it dopamine bottom or dopamine pit, where you may suffer the next day in the consequences of the consumption. It's not that bad, but of course it varies depending on individuals. I remember my group mates have been suffering significantly. Me, not so much. But then at some point in time I had this experience myself and realized that yeah, probably MDMA is not that good. Although, now thinking about it, it could be not in pure MDMA, and that could be the reason. Because MDMA creates high levels of norepinephrine or adrenaline, it causes heart rate, so there is not a maybe risk per se, although if you have heart-related issues, better not consume MDMA in the first place. And if you don't have schizophrenia or if you have schizophrenia or bipolar disease, or you are in an untrustworthy setting, better not consume any of the entheogens at all. This is critical, okay? I will talk about it a lot, because even though MDMA creates a lot of love and empathy, it creates a lot of potential for abuse. Because if you are in an inappropriate setting or set, or with a person who you cannot trust, it can backfire and people may use you and cause even more severe trauma than the one that you've tried to fix. So those are the risks. Of course, there are other risks like hypothermia, and there are risks related with dehydration. That's why people drink a lot of water, and there was a problem in the rave club scene. UK government at some point in time introduced a recommendation for people consuming club drugs to drink more water, and a lot of people died because of it, because they drank too much water. So 5 liters of water is a lethal dose, okay? So water is dangerous. Don't forget about that. So if you are consuming substances in a nightclub, make sure that you don't drink too much water. I remember at one of the raves at Tomorrowland Festival, or what was it? Loveland Festival in Netherlands in 2023, where I've been together with my wife. If you go to a place where people drink water, there's a big sign saying don't drink too much water. I'm not sure if I have a picture of it, but the idea here is that don't, again, overconsume any substance and you'll be fine. So let me try and wrap up here, because I've been talking for quite a while and I don't know whether or not it was effective or interesting or engaging. If it was, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and please comment. I do need some feedback. Maybe I need to improve something very significantly and very fast in order to make it work. So far, not that much anyway. So let me quickly summarize what I've been talking about today. I've introduced the topic of MDMA and its use in therapeutic context, and how it helps treat various types of mental illnesses such as post-traumatic syndrome disorder, and how it was used in clubs in the rave scene. I also mentioned to use some of the aspects related to history and some people who played crucial role in development of the MDMA, and of course MAPS founded by Rick Doblin in 1986. So as the world moves on and the Entheogenic Renaissance happening, the application of MDMA will grow in at least US. But of course other countries in EU will soon. Other countries in European Union, for example, are lagging quite behind. So I do hope that there is a potential for countries not only in Western continents, but in Asia as well, where entheogens are not that widely discussed, to a shame, at least of mine, because I love Asia. Been there multiple times, and I'm heading to India quite soon. Or actually not, yeah, well, India and then Sri Lanka. And probably by the time it is public, I will be residing in Sri Lanka. Maybe in the Vipassana retreat, if those motherfuckers ever respond to me. Probably after Vipassana, I'm gonna say something slightly different, if I ever get there. I don't know, I filed an application and they just don't respond. That's just so brutal. I mean, it's been almost a month so far. But anyway, so MDMA, ecstasy, Molly, E, or any other variations is used in treating mental illnesses. So thank you for watching, and I do hope that it was interesting. If not, please do let me know. Otherwise, share, like, subscribe, spread the knowledge, and support Entheogenic Renaissance, and particularly the other Russian. That would be me.